Welcome to the Grow Your Money podcast, where we're on a mission to change how we talk about money. Our fireside chats are the heart of our show, bringing the energy and excitement of in-person events straight to your ears. We aim to connect you with inspiring voices and stories that matter, sharing relatable experiences and insights that will transform your financial life. Everyone deserves access to practical financial knowledge, so we're making money conversations relatable by inviting guests from all walks of life to share their real-life experiences with money. But this isn't your typical money show. We look at the emotional, psychological, and cultural factors that shape our relationship with money. So hit subscribe and join us for another episode of the Grow Your Money podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Grow Your Money Challenge. It's great to have you, Nathan and Tynah, with us today, joining us. And it's an interesting conversation, intriguing stories and backgrounds. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Nathan, do you want to tell us a bit about you and how you go from being a footballer to mortgages? Very, very interesting and diverse roles.
Well, thanks for having me first and foremost. A bit about myself. So, professional footballer for the last 12 years. Finally hung up my boots and put that to one side and decided to go on the career of mortgage advice. It kind of happened when I was about 25, really. Me and my wife were buying our first property, and the mortgage advisor that dealt with me was brilliant. I left the consultation with him just thinking I would really love to do that job. It was really fulfilling to be able to, really help people that didn't know anything about finance at that age to, just guide them through the journey and kind of hold their hand for the whole process to enable them to, live their dreams, which was to purchase their first property. So that was the kind of catalyst. And then when COVID hit, there was a lot of downtime for us footballers. We had nothing to do, and I thought that was a great time to just do all my qualifications, get them all out the way, and set myself up for life after football, because obviously it's a very short career. And in doing that, I could tap into my network of all around the UK, enabling me to get into somewhere to get the experience. And maybe I think it was 2 years ago now, I set up my own company, Dwell on Mortgages, and this is where I am now. Helping people from first-time buyers to buy-to-let landlords to portfolio landlords and everything in between, enabling them to get the right funding for their dreams.
Exciting, and it must be really fulfilling once you've gotten them over the line. That must be really fulfilling.
Yeah, that's like scoring a goal for me. Like in a career, that's what you want to do. It's when you get that yes moment for your client, you just want to bring them straight away and let them know, because you're just gonna hear joy over the phone, and that's the real fulfilling part of the job.
Nice meeting you, and we're looking forward to a great conversation. Tynah, please tell us a bit about yourself and how you with Generation Rent. Great title, great name for your company too.
Yes. Hello. Thank you so much for having me on as well. I'm not. My background isn't exciting as a footballer, I'm afraid, but just as passionate about helping out people with housing and renting, as I'm sure Nathan is. So Generation Rent, we are a UK-wide campaigns and advocacy group organisation. We are advocates, campaigners for private renters all around the UK. We are very passionate that every single person should be able to have access to a safe, secure and affordable home. So that's exactly what we've been fighting for. And my work specifically is around marginalised communities. So making sure that when we say everyone has access to a safe and secure home, that we do mean absolutely everyone.
Wow, very interesting. And I looked at the report, it's so intriguing. And how come you're doing this? It's such important work. One that you'd need to be passionate about. Is there anything in your background that's led to this, or is it just from the research point of view?
So, I've been working for Generation Rent for, I think I've committed to 4 years, which I've just worked out in my head and is slightly terrifying, but that is, I think, where I am. Our work is, so I've been working for a number of years, and what we were increasingly seeing was that we were doing a lot of great work with politicians and in the media and the press and social media. But what we weren't doing well enough was reaching through to marginalised communities. We weren't diverse enough. We weren't accessible enough for lots of different communities, different groups to feel like we were accessible and that we were working for them. So this work and sort of other projects that I've been working on have really been born out of that need to be representative and to be inclusive, and to make sure that any reforms, any changes that do improve lives for renters reach through to absolutely everyone, and that includes people who are, often at the very worst of the housing crisis and are struggling the most, which are people who are from migrant backgrounds, people from minority ethnic backgrounds, survivors of abuse, and other sort of minoritized and racialized groups.
Yeah, it's really an interesting space, because even with the whole first time buyers, I wonder, Nathan, what your thoughts are on that. How the landscape is affecting first time home buying for people of color, or underrepresented communities, versus access to rent. Because housing is it's like one of the basic needs in life, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Second to food, isn't it? It's second to, or is it third to food and clothing? Something there, but one of the most important things, right? And yet it's one of the things that's being attacked at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, over the last year or so, the landscape for first-time buyers and renters has changed dramatically from, increased rent to unable to apply for mortgages based on deposit. So there's been so many different areas of the housing market which has kind of come under attack for people that were trying to get, affordable housing or their first step on the ladder. So I think it's calmed down. So I would say from June this year, we've seen a shift on my side in terms of mortgages that's enabled people to really go out there and actually get the right financing for their properties. And what we've seen is a lot of people now are a lot more prudent in regards to how much they're looking to spend on their first property. Before that, it was kind of the world was your oyster. I want to get as the biggest property as I can as my first property. Where I think people have really had to draw a line as to how much they can actually afford and be a bit more sensible based on interest rates. And the realization that actually me just having a small property to begin with, which most people did back in the day anyway, and build from there is much more beneficial to me than just buying the lavish home that I want for Instagram and social media, essentially.
It's very interesting, and I totally agree. I think we stumbled upon that because when we got our first home, it was how, I suppose, from the background I was coming from, because we came here just before the crisis in 2008, and we didn't understand the whole thing, that the market was crashing. For us, it was like, yay, we can get on the property ladder kind of thing
Yeah,
in a few years. But then we're trying to get the biggest property for the most amount we could afford, rather than thinking about it that this is your first property. What you should be doing is just trying to get on the property ladder, understand how to get on it. And then once you move into a bigger property later, you could actually rent that out. That could be you getting onto like
yeah,
investment.
exactly. Yeah,
It's trying to educate people and saying your first house doesn't have to be the perfect or the most, it doesn't have to tick all the boxes. It just has to tick some,
exactly.
and you
Yeah.
do the other stuff. And Tilly, I'm really intrigued. A brilliant report, brilliant findings. I wonder how you're finding that side of things then, and how you're using the report to shape the work you do at Generation Rent, but also what are the next steps after the report, I suppose.
So I think what sort of renting and sort of, so obviously lots of people have house ownership, home ownership as a dream, and that's that's a dream I'm yet to realize. I'm a private renter. And there are people who it might be sort of the most practical thing for that moment to be renting, or there are a lot of people who just cannot get onto the property ladder and cannot buy a home, they can't afford a home. And what was sort of unearthed in the report is that sort of what we already know is that people from particular backgrounds and migrant peoples in particular are, practically speaking, for a lot of this members of this group, renting is the only option, and private renting specifically is the only option. I think something around a third of migrant peoples are private renters, and I think something around 3/4 of newly arrived migrant peoples are private renters. And if you look at sort of refugees and other groups, then practically speaking, renting is the option. That's what you're looking for to live in. So maybe home ownership is a dream for people one day, but for now, in the immediate moment, renting is what we're looking at. The big findings in the report were that at pretty much every stage, migrant groups face unique barriers or are disproportionately likely to face increased barriers that obviously lots of renters face, but migrant peoples face are more likely to experience. So things like difficulty in affording the rent because of income inequality is a massive issue. And all renters can be affected by difficulties in things like affording the rent, in affording a new deposit for a new property, and proving to landlords that you can, passing that those really important affordability checks. That they affect lots of renters, but the report shows is that migrant peoples are especially likely to face those barriers to safe and secure homes. What the report also found was that there are quite unique barriers for migrant peoples, so especially around immigration control. So a really good example of this is we have something called right to rent checks in England specifically, not in Scotland or Wales, but in England. And these are requirements for all landlords to check that a potential tenant has the right to rent in this country. What this means in practice is a lot of landlords, because the stakes are so high and people can have really very large fines and even go to prison if a landlord makes this mistake a number of times. What it's made is it's made a lot of landlords very reluctant to rent to any migrant, regardless of whether even if they do have the right to rent. So what we found is that there are specific things like immigration checks and parts of the hostile environment and things like these right to rent checks that, on top of sort of income inequality and difficulty in affording rent, are also adding extra barriers, which means that it's really, really tough for migrant peoples. And then what that does is it creates this devastating situation where people are being forced to choose between homelessness, which is terrible outright in itself, or the other sort of alternative choice, if you can call it a choice, is to put up with terrible conditions, terrible harassing landlords and letting agents, because these are the only sorts of homes and sorts of landlords that will rent to people who are from these sorts of backgrounds. So it's a pretty horrendous choice, homelessness or terrible standards, terrible conditions. But it is unfortunately the choice that we found in this report. Lots and lots of people who are born abroad and living in the UK are being forced to make.
Can I just touch on that in regards to what I found on my side, so the landlord, so to speak. I guess Tilly kind of speaks for the tenant, and I can kind of look at it from a landlord's point of view. I found, especially over the last, say, year and a half, a lot of landlords going towards the HMO route, which is obviously to maximise their profitability of one property by renting, 3 or 4 rooms for £500 to £600, rather than renting the whole property for £1,000. And that, obviously, from a business point of view, makes a lot of sense. But from a tenant point of view, it takes away from a family that needs one property, just because obviously someone can rent to 5 different people. So it really does take away from the kind of properties that Tilly would need for those families and those migrants. Mm-hmm. And it does marginalise them because, like I said, they've got sometimes I hear of it where they've got 2 or 3 families living in one property. Mm-hmm. And that family has one room, that family has one room. So it is an issue that needs to be looked at. And I know there are regulations in place for HMO landlords to have certain licenses and whatnot, but when it comes to doing the applications, I do find a lot of them slip through the net, whether it be through not declaring it or XYZ. That there are issues that should be rectified to enable people to have the right kind of living conditions for their situation.
Yes, just for the audience to understand, an HMO is a house in multiple occupation. And then just to tie this together, then there's always a possibility, even if it was not like you're forced to be, renting. Sometimes it's actually the practical thing. You move around a lot, or your lifestyle just doesn't agree with, getting onto the property ladder. I think the key thing is trying to get the most efficient resource for your situation. So if it's renting or trying to get on the property ladder, it's how best can you move towards that direction. And I wonder, because you've talked about houses in multiple occupation, which for sure would make sense for landlords, but there may be circumstances as well where 2 families, for example, have migrated together and there's a shortage in housing where house in multiple occupation is a requirement, right? Or would be helpful. But in terms of the practical steps going forward, how do you see from your findings in the market, Nathan and Tilly, from the report, what would the practical things be from a regulation point of view to try and make this an equal or a better ground
I'll go first. So, in regards to the landlord side, the requirements for the landlord only really is to have an application for a HMO license. They don't technically need to have a HMO license. They just need to have put in the application, and if that's done, then the lenders are happy to lend on it. So maybe a bit more of of gatekeeping to enable the right kind of landlords to do it, that are going to have the best interest for the tenants in mind. Because, like we say, there are some landlords that are only there for profit, and they'll squeeze every little drop they can out of it without giving the right living conditions. And we've seen the TV shows where people are living pretty much squalor, with no kind of link to the landlord to kind of sort it out. So if we can have a bit more gatekeeping in that response to enable those kind of HMO properties, which, to be fair, some migrants will need and it will suit them, but just to make sure that those HMO properties are dealt with properly and are up to a certain level of code, to enable a good standard of living.
Mm-hmm. Very good point, Nathan. And Tilly?
No, I think absolutely everything that Nathan just said was completely on point. And yet the HMO issue, so there can be overcrowding in lots of different housing. It doesn't have to be HMO, but HMOs, as small occupancy, are often the worst. And as Nathan said, there are licensing schemes in place. There's mandatory licensing. There's also individual licensing schemes in different councils, and they can be really powerful tools in preventing this sort of the squalid conditions that people are being forced to live in. But again, as Nathan said, a lot of it is going under the radar. A lot of people are getting away with continuing to rent out completely unsuitable homes, completely unsafe homes, because there isn't enough enforcement of those licensing and of other regulations. And a big issue for that is that local councils just don't have enough money to do the enforcement that's needed. So that's a big thing that needs to change, which is that local councils need that money, that funding, to really take landlords to task and to court, and to if we're going to see a situation where these criminal landlords are removed, and so bad landlords are removed, and that will sort of definitely help with the situation. But yeah, and just more broadly to that, we're looking to there's a new bill that's been promised to renters, which is called the Renters' Rights Bill with the new government, and that's going to do loads of really helpful things. We don't know exactly the details on it yet, but we're optimistic. We think that we'll be doing lots of really positive things for renters. So doing things like ending Section 21, no fault evictions, which is where a landlord doesn't need a reason to evict a tenant, that they'll be going under the new laws. And that's going to be really helpful, because what happens now a lot of the time is people feel scared to report things to the landlord for disrepair issues, because the landlord can quite easily turn around and say, well, you're annoying me now, so I'll evict you and I'll get in a more compliant tenant, even though obviously it's completely within your rights as a tenant to ask for repair work to be done. So with those sorts of evictions gone, that will definitely make it a lot easier for tenants to be able to use their rights and to get landlords to do the things that landlords are supposed to do. As well as but we need greater protections of tenants from eviction, which we're hoping to see in the bill, and we need to see more money for local councils so they can actually enforce the laws that we have.
Interesting, because I wonder then how that affects the market as a whole, because there's a shortage in housing, and then if there's so many stringent laws, does that not counter people wanting to get into being landlords, for example?
I was just going to go on to that. So what I've seen is, with what Tilly just said there, it totally makes sense. But looking at it from a landlord's point of view again, they've been stretched so much over the last year in terms of affordability, in terms of now they have to pay tax on the whole of their rental income, not just their profit. So they've been squeezed so much that, even though they shouldn't look at trying to be as profitable as possible to the detriment of their tenants, some of them are in a situation where they have no choice as well. So I feel like if there was a bit more leniency on landlords' tax reasons, or implications to have maybe better rates, you would see a bit more leeway on the tenant to be able to go to landlord and say, hey, we've got this issue, and there's money there to enable the landlord to say, okay, let's repair this, let's repair that. But at the minute, landlords technically don't have it, and I say that sparingly, because if you're a landlord, you really have a couple of assets already in your name. You have a stream of income coming in. You probably have a decent enough job. So I say that with a pinch of salt, but everyone has been hit quite hard in this financial crisis. Where yes, tenants are finding it hard, but so are landlords. Everyone has a standard of living that they want to maintain. So it's just a case of finding that balance in enabling the tenant to have the right amount of protection and cover, but also the landlord to have that leeway and that little bit of a breathing space from what they're currently being strapped with in regards to tax and affordability from mortgage providers.
So we hear this a lot, which is that legislation equals landlords leaving, and that will be a crisis create a crisis in renting and housing. There's very little that indicates that more legislation is ever leads to sort of reduced rental numbers. We've seen in Scotland the removal of Section 21 there, or their equivalent, but the removal of no-fault evictions, and that hasn't had any impact on declining numbers of rental properties. We sort of see changes into the Welsh system. We've not seen any changes there. Doesn't seem to be this link that people keep warning of between greater legislation and fewer rented properties. And I think a big reason for that is the sort of changes that we're looking at and that have come in elsewhere and will be coming into England hopefully relatively shortly. Is that these aren't sort of massive radical changes. These are sort of quite, I would say, common sense things that prevent landlords from doing really quite exploitative things, like for example what I said before about a landlord evicting a tenant who asks for can you repair the boiler, stop preventing landlords from doing things like that. I don't think anyone would defend it. I think absolutely needs to go. It's that sort of exploitation and really quite poor unethical behaviour. That's the sort of thing that legislation will be getting rid of, whilst good landlords who take their responsibilities really seriously, who would never obviously dream of evicting a tenant just because they've reported a repair issue, who wouldn't give their tenants sort of an unfair or reasonable rent increase, or certainly would respect their privacy and wouldn't harass them or enter property without giving them due notice. Those are the sorts of landlords who obviously we want to keep and will not be affected by this legislation and sort of future legislation. So it's certainly nothing to fear if you're a good landlord. You need to take your roles responsibly, which most do, I'm sure. There really isn't anything to worry about, and we see that practically speaking, when we see changes to the law, we have seen them elsewhere. There isn't really a decline in rented properties, so it's really a net benefit for good landlords get to do exactly what they've been doing already. Bad landlords are kicked out of the market, and renters get more rights. So it's sort of that win-win situation, really. That
there's an argument of bad renters as well, though, Tilly. There's an argument for where the law can then be used against the landlords. So with the eviction thing, for example, the bad tenants would then be overstaying, squatting becomes, prevalent. Isn't there a balance to be had? And also to Nathan's point, where for sure, if you're going to bring in more regulation, surely you should also, on the other hand, be reducing taxes, giving them tax breaks, or sort of incentivizing the ability to effect these changes. Because the fact of the matter is, being a landlord has gone up. The prices, the interest rates, and all that goes up automatically. So isn't there a balance to be had where the landlords should also get more rights in terms or tax reliefs to allow them to do these changes that are required?
So things need to be fair. I don't think anyone's pushing for an unfair system for either side. It's this. There is no danger that sort of this legislation would lead to sort of increased squatting. It's very, we don't know what the details are going to be like in the legislation, and we'll be commenting on that later. It's looking to be a pretty, as I say, fair, balanced, common sense way of just improving things for renters as well as keeping things fair for landlords. No one's suggesting some sort of radical overhaul of the system that will sort of benefit tenants over the other. That's definitely not what we're looking for. It is just a fairer system in which tenants can feel comfortable and safe in their homes, and they're protected from unfair evictions and ultimately homelessness.
And then maybe touching on the homelessness point, are there any key pointers you've seen from the research, or just working in the space? Any top tips for people who are homeless or on the verge of homelessness? Any resources that they can go for? I find that people who are like migrating to a new country there's nowhere, you don't know where to start from in terms of, you don't know where to find resources. You don't know who is the right person to speak to. Everyone is giving you their own opinion. What's your top tips for people who are on the verge of homelessness?
So it's really difficult because I say it is weighted against people. So it's top tips can only go so far if you're really like facing homelessness in that sort of situation. There are things to bear in mind, and being and educating yourself on your rights as a renter is really, really useful. We have resources on our own website, and there are long form, in-depth rights information in different languages that I'd be happy to sort of I'm sure I could point people in the direction of. There are other organisations as well, so Shelter, Citizens Advice. These are really good organisations that also have helplines as well, that you can access lots of information about renting. The Chartered Institute of Housing have a migrant-specific campaign, so I think they also have some information on their website as well. I've said the word website a lot, so a lot of this is very online resources, which isn't always accessible to everyone. But there are sometimes local groups as well, community groups that, again, which will offer translation and language services as well. So that's always worth sort of looking into locally. Something I will say is a big top tip is, absolutely landlords and letting agents, whoever it is you're sort of renting from directly, will very often have some useful advice and information about your tenancy and how things work. I would strongly suggest getting from a range of sources and not just taking sort of what your landlord or letting agent have said as read, because sometimes they get things wrong or sometimes they just miss things out. But it's always worth having a look into things and making sure that you are fully aware of your rights as a renter and their responsibilities to you as a renter as well. And if things do get to a point where you are struggling with homelessness, where you're worried about homelessness, or if you're worried with things like disrepair not being done or conditions or overcrowding, a really good where to go is to your local council. So they will be able to offer you support as well as potentially investigations and some protection.
Okay. And then Nathan, I wanted to pose a similar question to you, but here around getting on the property ladder, because that's becoming harder. It's taking longer for people to get onto the property ladder. In fact, I was reading a statistic about the age getting further and further away from when people are being able to afford a property. And for people of color or migrants who are coming into the country, there's the added issue of credit scoring. So any tips there, or what you're finding in the market, how to navigate that whole world of thin credit files or no credit history at all?
Yeah, of course. So we'll start off with the kind of getting on the property ladder to begin with. Obviously, the deposit is always the biggest thing for most people, and it's a stumbling block that we need to kind of hurdle over. Lenders have kind of heard that, and that back and call in regards to Skipton offering the 100% mortgage. We've also got it was Nottingham Building Society. They offer, it was Accord Mortgages and Yorkshire Building Society that offered a £5,000 deposit mortgage.
Okay.
That would allow you to buy a property up to the value of £200,000. So there are things that their lenders are doing that will help promote and push people to buy their first properties. Whether or not it's working, I can't really say yes or no. But there are new and different options out there for first time buyers. In terms to kind of the migrants and immigrants that are coming over on visas and whatnot, there are hurdles again that they need to jump over, but surprisingly enough, that it isn't as big and as vast as you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, for most migrants, we can possibly get them a mortgage based on them being in the UK for 6 months. Some lenders don't even need a minimum term of residency in the UK. So, for instance, NatWest, we've got Nottingham Building Society, and we've got digital mortgages, all of which I've done applications with over the last 2 to 3 weeks for some from foreign nationals on visas, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And they've all been successful. So there are hurdles we need to jump over, but making sure we know which ones we need to go over and how to negate them always goes a long way to getting an application over the line. I mean, in regards to tier 2 visas themselves, you need to obviously have an employer that sponsors you to come over, and you need to be a skilled worker. Those are probably the most easiest and applicable applications to to get through to a lender, because you've already got a job. Hopefully the affordability will match, and again, hopefully you've got the deposit ready to go. But if you've got those three things with a tier 2 visa, the application should be quite straightforward. And in regards to credit scoring, again, most lenders would want to see 2 years worth of credit scoring. That's not always the case that needs to be done for an application, but for anyone looking to apply for a mortgage, and that goes for anyone that's a UK national or a foreign national, having a good credit score and no real blips on your credit file goes a long way in regarding to underwriting an application. Because as a foreign national, you're already a higher risk than someone that lives in the UK from birth, because you can leave the country at any time. So the lender would put you on a higher risk than anyone else. So if you've got that, along with a couple of blips on your credit card or your loan that you might have had that you've missed a payment, that's going to ring alarm bells to lenders to say, is this person lendable to, or should we look elsewhere? And all they're looking for is, are they a safe bet for us to get our money back? Most of them will have their own internal scorecard, and again, it's all based on a case-by-case basis. So my case compared to Tilly's case will be totally different, purely based on our the way we might live our life, the way we do our finances, our age. There's loads of different factors to it. So there's no real broad stroke on how to get the best out of your credit score, but just to be sensible and lend reasonable, and obviously take care of your finances the best you can, will enable most underwriters to give you the green tick and get an application over to an offer.
And interestingly, does that also include, for on the tier 2 visa, does that include buy-to-let mortgages as well, or is it just for your primary residence?
Yeah, so with tier 2 visas, you can get a buy-to-let mortgage, but you have to have a residential mortgage before you have a buy-to-let.
Right.
So think of it this way: if I came over from another country and I said I wanted to buy a buy-to-let mortgage, I only earn, say, £15,000 in a relatively normal job, and I wanted to buy property. I've got maybe 34, 40k in cash that I can use to deposit, which is great, but my job is only £15,000. I then go to get a buy-to-let mortgage. The lender's going to look at that and say, they class it as a backdoor buy-to-let, which essentially means you're buying it as a buy-to-let based on the rental of £1,000, let's so to say. So the rent pays for the mortgage, but actually what you're going to do is you're just going to go and live in there yourself. And that will be against regulations, because a buy-to-let mortgage is different to a residential mortgage. So most lenders would require you to own your own residential property first before you bought your buy-to-let. So as long as you've got your own residential property that's in your name, you can then buy a buy-to-let as well. That's absolutely fine. The only other way to negate that would be to put your money into a limited company, which is called an SPV, special purpose vehicle. And that would then remove yourself as the owner and would put the company as the owner of the property. And then you could buy it as a buy-to-let without having to own your own residential property. That's the only way you could really do it.
Interesting. And Tilly, I just wanted to know, any overlaps in this, because, even for renters, there's deposits. I don't know how it is in England, but certainly in Scotland, we have deposit schemes which is good for the renter. And I think that's one of the regulations that I think is quite, powerful in terms of, surely the deposit should be protected. So you shouldn't, as a landlord, be using the deposit for something different. And I think that also sets you up for when it's time to get up on the property ladder. You will need a deposit at some point. Are you finding that linkage in terms of going through the renter journey being a preparation ground for when you become a property owner? And are there any tips that people should know about if they're new to country or trying to just understand how they can use their renter experience to prepare them for getting on the property ladder?
So it is a very good scheme, the deposit systems, and for people who aren't aware, your landlord needs to give you evidence that they've put your deposit into a specific scheme. There's 3 specific schemes that they can put it into. So if they haven't done that, then that's something that you should be aware of that they should have done. It's also worth remembering that there's a limit on how much a landlord can charge you for your deposit, and that is 5 weeks of it. Can I double check that? Sorry, how much is the limit?
Sure.
Don't want to give people the wrong information.
Maybe just to say that the figures change often. They change like every so often, isn't it?
To be honest, they don't. I've it's lost. I'm useless, so I've forgotten the.
What I meant was that whatever the price, whatever the amount could be right now, would change over time due to inflation and other factors anyway. So it's always worth you keeping yourself updated.
It's 5 weeks rent. Was I right the first time? I think I may, but okay. Sorry. I'll repeat that sentence. Something else to be really aware of is that a landlord has a limit on how much they can charge you for deposits. So they can only charge you 5 weeks of rent for a deposit. So if they charge you for more than that, then that's illegal, and they shouldn't be doing that. As a sort of side tip as well, that sort of every renter should know this, and very few do. There's a certain number of things that a landlord and a new tenancy, when you have a new tenancy, should be giving you. One of those is evidence that they've put your deposit into a protected scheme. They also need to give you a written tenancy agreement, a gas safety certificate if there's a gas supply, an electrical safety certificate if there's an electrical supply, a government how to rent guide, and your energy protection, your EPC, your energy protection certificate. So that tells you how energy efficient your home is. If a landlord doesn't give you these things and at no point in your tenancy, and then serves you with a Section 21 no fault eviction, you are protected from that Section 21 eviction. So as a little tip, it's probably worth, if they haven't given you those things, not mentioning it to them. And then if they do try to evict you, say at that point, well, you can't use this eviction because you haven't given me all these documents. So definitely look into that if you think you haven't been given all the documents that you're needed. That is a top tip for people to be aware of, and all renters should know. But yeah, I mean, it's a good, it's sort of, there's a similar sort of setup, I suppose, between renting and owning home. It's the number one tip or thing that you should be aware of is that no matter what happens, you do need to pay your rent every single month. It feels sort of unfair sometimes if, for example, a landlord isn't doing what they should be doing, and hasn't been fixing the boiler, hasn't been sorting the roof out. It feels like you don't, why should I have to pay my rent when the landlord isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing? But you do have to pay your rent every single month. Things can go really, really badly for you as a renter if you don't. You are obviously vulnerable to eviction. You are also vulnerable to it affecting your credit rating for the worst, which obviously will then affect things like being able to buy a house later, as well as being able to find new tenancies with landlords. So you do always need to be paying your rent. So that does, I suppose, teach a good lesson in terms of when you pay your mortgage, you also do need to pay your mortgage every single month. But it's a very different sort of situation being a renter, the sort of lack of security in particular, and a lack of rights. Which is obviously why lots of people are really quite desperate to get onto the property ladder and own a home, sort of to be free of that sort of insecurity. But we are sort of pushing for a better sort of situation where people don't feel like that as renters, and do feel sort of safer in their homes.
Very insightful conversation. Thank you both very much. I think the last question I'll ask each of you is, Tilly, I did find your research really interesting. If people wanted to read it or find out the next steps on that, could you tell us where they find it and also what the next steps are with that?
Definitely. So it's available on our website. If you Google or whatever browser that you have, if you use that to just do Google generation rent migrants, then that will mostly bring it up. You can go to our website, which is generationrent.org, and it's on there. If you just go into our search bar and type migrants, and that the research will pop up there. We've got a nice sort of short form blog to go over the key bits, as well as a longer form report if you're really interested in going the mile and reading the full report. But so it's definitely available to read. It's got lots of different stats about just how hard it is renting as a migrant, from sort of starting out and looking for a new property to living in a new property, as well as facing things like eviction and homelessness, which are you are at more risk of, unfortunately, if you are a migrant in this country. And yeah, so we are optimistic about the way things are going for renters and migrant renters in particular. We obviously have a new government, and we're looking forward to engaging with them on using the findings of this report, as well as other work that we're doing to really fight for the rights of private migrant renters. And it's just what we want to make this really positive impact, where people who are migrants feel fulfilled and feel that they are sort of comfortable and happy in the country, and also we as a country benefit from more cohesion, more productivity. People have sort of have that freedom and access to sort of living the lives that living to the full potential that they can. That's good for them and it's good for the country. So we are working with the government to make sure that the rights of and voices of migrant renters are heard, as well as other marginalised groups and renters as a whole.
Thank you. And Nathan, what's your top tip for a migrant coming over, trying to get onto the property ladder? But also, just as we close, if you tell us a bit about what dwelling mortgages difference is, and how you engage with your clients generally.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I would say in regards to migrants and people coming over, foreign nationals, what's hard for them to kind of grasp and understand is the doings and the regulations of a new country. So one thing that probably people that I've noticed don't really want to do is go and ask and step forward and put their trust into someone that, do they have my best interests at heart. So I think one thing that really would help is representation. And obviously, people that look like myself and whatnot in positions of finance where for the majority of the UK, it's it doesn't look like me, basically, essentially. And what's good is, and what I found is, when you can speak their language, and that's not to say you speak 10 or 15 different languages, but you understand their cultural needs and interests, and you can understand where they're coming from in certain aspects. That goes a long way to them being able to trust you and enable them to kind of tell you exactly what they need for you to have their best interests at heart. So I think that's probably one thing that myself at Dwello and how we work is, we really try to get to the root of what they need in regards to, they need a remortgage because their daughter's getting married and they're flying a whole lot of people over from India or something like that, where you really need to understand what they're going through, their life situation, the cultural biases that they might have or need or have to do. Might seem strange to some people, but if you understand it, you can kind of work from there and kind of give them the best advice you can. But I mean, Dwello Mortgages, we're here to help. That's the main point. We're here to help. I want to put a smile on my client's face. I want to call them up and say, I've got you that mortgage offer. Because if they're happy, I'm happy. We're here to help in any kind of aspect, whether it be bridging finance, whether it be commercial finance, residential, buy-to-let. We can do all of that for our clients, all under one roof, all under one banner, and it will be me that they'll be dealing with. So a lot of other kind of companies, whether it be big or small, they're quite rigid 9 to 5. Where I'm happy. I was on holiday last week and I was still doing emails and calls to my clients. So I'm very, very flexible to enable to get the best outcome for my clients in the quickest amount of time.
Scoring goals. Sounds like we're all scoring goals. Tilly, we hope you score the goal with the change in the legislation. Looking forward to that. And Nathan, just keep on getting people on the property ladder. It's been brilliant having you both. Very insightful conversation and interesting, coming at it from the two different points of views, because that's the thing. We seem to think that there's one size fits all, but absolutely not. People can be renters, people can be homeowners. It's what works for your journey and where you're at in life at the moment. So thank you both very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Your Money podcast. If you're looking to take actionable steps toward achieving your financial goals, visit moneymatix.com. That is money, MATIX.com. And join our free Grow Your Money Challenge. Let's unite in the movement to inspire people to talk about money. Thank you for being a part of our community. We'll see you in the next episode.